welcome to the Data Platform Virtual Summit 2021. This is Ben Miller. I am going to speak to you about DBAs getting more done in less time with PowerShell. You got to use this stuff. This is going to be a presentation a lot about PowerShell and the practical use of PowerShell. And this is not going to be a session where you'll learn PowerShell at all. It will be more that you will glean more techniques and abilities to use PowerShell in your DBA work by applying and using the things that I show you in this presentation. Let's get started. The only thing you need to worry about with this slide, I've done a lot of things. I've enjoyed using PowerShell, SQL, all the things. I've done a lot of things in the author realm, but my email address and my alias out there online, I am DBA Duck everywhere. Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, all of those are DBA Duck, and my website. My email address is ben@benmiller.net, and you are welcome to use it. I'm really good at responding and happy to talk to you about things that you might not see covered or things that might be coming up in the PowerShell realm. Here's our agenda today. They're very simple. Most of the time we're going to be spent in demo. Slides are a great way to introduce you to some concepts of PowerShell, but really the mechanism for you to learn what to do with PowerShell is to see it. It's pretty hard to describe and have you completely get it. So we will be showing you the tools needed for this presentation and demo. We're going to show you how to get the tools. Getting the tools is really important. And then some quick tips that you might want to know about in using the two tools we're going to talk about. Well, the three tools. We're going to talk about Azure Data Studio as well. So the modules and things like that we're going to use in this demo and in this in your DBA world. We'll be shown how to get them and some tips. And then I'm just going to illustrate on a slide the backup commands and the restore commands, just so you can get an idea of what they look like. But there's going to be a little piece in there that you'll need to learn so that you can use the modules that I introduced you to effectively. And then it's going to be time for demo. Most of the time we're going to spend in demo showing you the things that you need to know, how to get set up, how to work it, and then how to discover some things that you need to know. So let's get started. First, we're going to be talking about getting the tools. Here's the tools you need. We're going to be using the SQL Server module. We're going to be using the DBA Tools module, and these are PowerShell modules that are freely available, that are out on PowerShell Gallery, and I'll show you how to get them. And then we're going to talk about Azure Data Studio, and really Azure Data Studio is just going to be taking your knowledge and combining it in a way that it's maybe self-documentation for you, or a way for you to get your thoughts out on a digital media part where you can actually execute each statement or each set of statements and get a flavor for how they work before you start coding them into scripts or even just using them on a command line. So notebooks are really, really handy, and Azure Data Studio is a pro tool where notebooks are concerned, especially for PowerShell notebooks. So that's the tools we're going to use. To get the tools, they're really all about how you are set up in your machines right now. So by default, Windows comes with Windows PowerShell. Up from 2016 and above, and Windows 10, you automatically have Windows PowerShell 5.1 installed and ready to go. Anything lower, like Windows 2012 or 2012 R2 or Windows 7, heaven forbid you're still back there, but sometimes you are in a server environment, you want to be a little more advanced than that. Everything below Windows 10 and below Windows 2016 has a lower version of PowerShell. But the beauty is that Windows PowerShell is installable. So you can configure Windows 2012 R2 to have Windows PowerShell 5.1 so that you can use these tools. But this is the basis of our thing, and the reason is because SQL Server module requires 5.1 to run it. So we are going to be in 5.1, and you should find a way to get there working with your IT staff, or if you have control of that, you should look to get to that on your own machines. Now on Windows 10, you have that automatically. So if you're running remotely and your Windows 10 is your admin machine, then you can run it on your machine and be just fine because Windows 10 has that. So the two commands here, Install-module SQL Server. I wanted to call this out on a slide just to describe it, and then you'll see it in demo. But install-module is the way you get modules installed from the PowerShell gallery for yourself. There are plenty of ways to put them. You can do it in your scope of your own user. You can do it in the scope of the machine. They go in different places, but that it's important to know what you're going to be able to do. If you don't have admin access on your jump box or on your Windows 10 machine, you can still install these modules with a scope of the user scope, which means it will put it in your documents folder, which you have full control of to install things in. So these documents or these modules are just packages that get unzipped into your world, so they aren't executables per se. So it does go in really nicely. But the first one is install-module SQL Server with a little parameter on the back of it called allow clobber. And the reason why I bring this up and illustrate this in the slides and not in the demo, which you'll see in the demo, but in this case I want to introduce you to the concept that there are rules in PowerShell. And PowerShell says if you have two modules with the same command, I don't like that. And I won't install it unless you tell me to. So this allow clobber just tells PowerShell it's okay to have two modules on the same machine with the same command. And that allow clobber lets that module still be installed instead. And the reason why it's important on SQL Server is because there's a SQL PS module. If you're installing this on a server that has SQL PS on it, which means you've installed SQL Server. After 2016, the Management Studio no longer installs SQL PS. Management Studio relies on the real native PowerShell and actually uses SQL Server module. So Management Studio itself does not install SQL PS. But if it's on a box that has SQL Server installed, it even from 2016 where it was deprecated, it still installs SQL PS because of dependencies. So that means that some commands that were in the SQL PS module, which have not been embellished, have not been added to, they will conflict with your SQL Server module installation. So we put the allow clobber just to tell PowerShell that we understand. We aren't going to ever be using SQL PS, but it is there, and I can't uninstall it because the SQL agent uses it, and we can't do that. So we allow it to happen. So allow clobber just says let it happen. And then the install-module DBA tools is how you get the DBA tools module from the PowerShell gallery. We'll show you a little bit more about that in demo just so you get an idea of how to do that. If you install SSMS 18.9.x, and I believe it may have been a couple of versions earlier as well, you get Azure Data Studio unless you tell it not to install Azure Data Studio. So you get Azure Data Studio as part of your install package. But it is not configured. We'll show you the configuration when we talk about adding support for PowerShell notebooks. We'll show you how to do that because it's a little hard to talk about. But it's pretty self-explanatory when you want to do it. It will lead you and guide you through it because it's pretty robust at this point. So Azure Data Studio is our third tool. If you do not install Management Studio, then you can install Azure Data Studio, and it's really as easy as Azure Data Studio download in a search. And you just pick the link that will say that goes to Microsoft's website to download the Azure Data Studio, install it, and now you have Azure Data Studio. So you don't have to have installed SSMS 18. You can just install Azure Data Studio and use notebooks. So we are not going to talk about anything we're doing with Management Studio in this particular session. That's for a different session. But we will talk about Azure Data Studio and PowerShell notebooks to make sure you get a flavor. Now, the only two things about getting the tools that I want to illustrate are the two bottom bullet points. One, by default, Windows 2016 and above typically, or I actually even see Windows 2012 R2, has a default execution policy assigned when you install those operating systems. And by default, it is remote signed. That is the policy you want to set, unless your company has a policy about PowerShell where it has to be all signed or whatever their policy is. But remote signed basically means it will run any script on your local machine just fine. If it's remote, if you try to run a PS1 file or a script from a UNC path on a network share. They have to be signed in order for them to run. Now you can run in modes like bypass or, heaven forbid, unrestricted, but the big deal is remote signed is secure, and you should do that. If you have UNCs, then you need to trust those and make sure that they're okay. The last thing is the PowerShell gallery is a PowerShell repository. It is set up with PowerShell Get, and you have the ability to get stuff from them. By default, PowerShell gallery repository is not trusted. So if you don't want to have to confirm every install dash module or update dash module with a yes to confirm you're going to download it, then you can set the PS repository of PS gallery to be trusted, and then you won't have those prompts for the confirmation that you're going to need to install. The quick tips, and I'll try to make this quick because we really want to get into demo. Import your module. Do not allow auto load. As of 3.0, auto load happens. If you run a command and you haven't loaded that module, it will auto load. I would advise you, especially in the DBA realm, to make sure that when you're intentionally using a module, just import it. Import dash module and to name your module, and just import the right one so that you don't have to worry about auto load, loading the wrong one. We won't really get into that because it's a different session, but I just want to make sure that you understand there's a tip to import module. The last two deal with variables. Now variables are all about storing stuff. We know about variables as a DBA. We have @ variables in SQL. Declare @ var1 as type int, and then we assign it a value, or we assign it later. Those are all great, and we use them all the time, and the reason is because that's storage for us. We get to carry a variable down, or we pass a parameter into a stored procedure. Think of that principle in what we're doing here. Now the benefit to variables in PowerShell is that they live at the scope that they are defined in. So if I create a variable and I use it at the very beginning of my script and I assign it something, it's available to the end of the script unless I remove it. So this variable has the ability to store context for you in the PowerShell realm. So you could set variables in your profile to be your environments. You can have a list of favorite servers or things that you do a lot. You can have your list of favorite databases or databases that you have to manage a lot, and save yourself the hassle of remembering the databases names first, and number two, being able to automate with those problem databases and do certain things without having to type them in or make your own list on the fly. So it's really handy to put those variables in your profile so they're always there. And I'll show you that in demo. It's really hard to describe, and you'll get a flavor for it. Then using variables for splatting. So this is the other piece. It goes with the variables in your profile as well. But the reality is that you're going to have some context that you're going to want to keep around. And sometimes if you form your objects in a certain way, you actually can use that object to splat variables or values into your parameters by splatting them into a function. And this is what I'm going to show you the most of. Just the ability to manipulate your environment, run the commands, have some variables set up for specific commands. So you can actually, if the commands are all the same or they use common things, stuff them in a variable. Write them once, read many, right? The worm principle. Write it once and read it many, many, many times. So if you have some administrative functions you're using in DBA tools or SQL Server and they're common, put those in a hash table and splat them. And you can multiple splat to a function, and you're going to see this too. But the big thing is, this is a tip that will save you a lot of time, a lot of typing in command lines and in scripts. Beautiful. You can set and change your hash table on the fly and then splat it again. It's a really cool principle, but that's one of the things I'm going to show you as this getting more done in less time, because you've pre-set up things that will be amazingly helpful for you. Now we're just going to quickly show you the backup and restore commands just to give you a flavor of what they look like, and then we're going to go into demo. So backup and restore databases, backup-DBA databases in DBA tools, backup-SQL databases in SQL Server module. The big thing to call out is the 3-letter prefix on the noun. So in PowerShell, we have verb dash noun. In this particular case, in the DBA world, we have verb dash 3 letters noun, verb dash 3 letters noun. And DBA tools, all of their commands now, after they've gone live with 1.0 and above, the DBA is the 3-letter prefix of every command so they don't clash with any other command. Can you imagine backup dash database? How many people could write a backup dash database command? A lot. And SQL Server module has a backup command, and lots of other scripts on PowerShell Gallery have a backup command, and you'd have to allow clobber everywhere, which is okay, but it's a lot of work. So backup dash DBA database gives you the ability to see that it is a DBA tools command, and backup dash SQL database is in the SQL Server module. So you can tell that they've thought this out. They've agreed to moniker their commands with the 3 letters. And now whenever you see a command out online where they say backup dash SQL database, you know it pertains to the SQL Server module typically. And the DBA one would pertain to the DBA tools module. And same with restore dash SQL database is SQL Server, restore dash DBA database is DBA tools. So those are things you're going to be watching for, is the prefixes used in front of the noun. And now we're going to go into demo. This is going to show you a lot of work to be done. We're going to show you the variables. We're going to show you how to use variables in your profile. We're not going to talk about profiles themselves. That's for a different session. This is an intermediate level session, so we're going to get crap done. And that makes things a lot more fun. So let's go into demo. In this demo, we're going to see a lot of things that we talked about in slides, but more in depth on how we can do things. And we're going to start with the profile because I mentioned that the variables that you have in PowerShell can be put in a profile or into a place where you can predefine some things. So I wanted to show you a little bit of an example of the PS module path. Remember I talked about having other modules installed and that I prefer to teach that you import your modules specifically. So the important thing to recognize here is that when you look at the PS module path, there is a variable in the environment called env, and we can find that out by doing a get PS drive. A get PS drive will show us that there's an env drive, and if I just did a directory of env, you would see there's plenty of stuff here, but there is a PS module path here, and that's going to be the key to how PowerShell auto loads their modules. So in here I've distilled it down to a version I want. If you look at this one, I've put these in different orders. So there's a program files, Windows PowerShell modules. Then there is a private one, and that is the user's DBA documents Windows PowerShell modules. If you notice here, the documents one is first because that's the private one. And by default, you typically would want that. But you might not want that in an automation or in something, so you have the ability to manipulate your module path and then put it in the variable called environment PS module path here. It's a little technique I use for the array. You have an array of objects and then you just join them with semicolons. So what you end up with, if I did execute this command or this code, you would see that I would end up with a list of module paths, but then if I said env PS module path, you'd see they're all in one with semicolons in between them. So I have changed it effectively to be program files, Windows PowerShell modules. So if it were to auto load, it would go into that folder, which I'll show you its contents just so you can get an idea of what it is. But C, Program Files, Windows PowerShell is where it puts all my modules. And in DBA Tools, it looks like I have 1.12 is the latest. And in my SQL Server, 18.24 or 18245 is the latest. Now, those would be the auto-loaded ones, rather than the one in the program files Microsoft SQL Server 150, which is where the SQL PS module lives. And we don't want that one. We want it last, just in case we import a module or we didn't import a module and we want it to auto-load. We could leave that one in there. If we wanted to eliminate it, we could completely eliminate it. So if I wanted to put it in my profile so that every time I launched PowerShell, I could notepad $profile, as that's where the file name is. And notice it says, I'm sorry, but there isn't one. The name of it is VS Code profile. And so it wants a special one if you're going to load it into VS Code or Azure Data Studio. So I could actually copy and paste this code here into my profile so that when I loaded it, it would actually load the PS module path and change it for every execution after I got into Azure Data Studio. Now the normal profile is here, and it is called Microsoft PowerShell Profile PS1, not VS Code. So I could put it in there as well and have it stay for when I launched a PowerShell window. But either way, you're putting something in your profile to keep it so that when you launch it, it actually goes up. And this applies to the code following. So explicitly importing the modules, I could do that in my profile. Creating myself a function that would allow me to get some encryption information, which we'll use in a minute. I could put this variable called SQL backup, and I'm just going to go through it really quickly because we're going to show you how to use it. But if you look at the backup, the SQL backup variable, I'm doing an at and a curly brace, which is the beginning of a hash table. And the hash table basically is a name and a value pair. So I did name equals the SQL 01, which is our first instance. Our database equals demo1. And I could just as well, with the DBA backup, it lets me have multiples. In the SQL backup ones, it will only let me do one. There's only one possible, and it allows you one. So database, we're going to back up demo1. The backup action is database. The full file name is going to be this with a date on it. So year, month, day, and then the 24-hour period, and then .back. So that's going to be my backup file, and I'm going to turn compression option on, and checksum is on as well. Now, this is the little trick, that part of the little tips and tricks, that if I have a switch parameter, which this is, there's no value when I do -checksum, all I have to do in a hash table is turn that to true, and it will turn on the switch when it gets splatted. So these are for splatting purposes, and maybe for documentation purposes as well, or for storage purposes for you. In the DBA backup one, we have a SQL instance instead of server instance, which is common. But I believe in the DBA tools, you actually have an alias of SQL, of server instance, so you can use them interchangeably. Database name, type is full in the DBA backup realm. And the path to get the backups to go is SQL backup. Now, in DBA tools, it actually creates a file name, and you'll see this in a minute. We're going to go into the C SQL backup to see what files get put here. We're going to delete these because these were from our previous demo. So this is empty. My SQL backup is going to become my folder, and you'll see the difference when the SQL Server module backs things up. We're going to do it several ways to show you how it works, but this is another variable for SQL encryption. This lets me specify the algorithm, the encryptor type, and the encryptor name. And in DBA encryption, this is for DBA tools, it's the encryption algorithm and the encryption certificate. So it assumes that you're using a server certificate by using encryption certificate parameter. So we just have to specify the name. So we don't have to tell it it's a server certificate like we do in SQL Server. All right, so having these all, let's load these all in memory. So all we have to do is run them. and it's run. And this is the DBA database one, so we'll just do this, and this is the splat. So the DBA backup is a variable right here, $ DBA backup, and I'm going to splat it, @ instead of a $, so that it knows that I'm taking the values in here and splatting them into this command, and it will let me run. And sure enough, it said it backed up demo. The total size was 4 meg, and the disk is this, and here's the start and the duration end. So this tells us how long it took. It didn't take very long. Duration is not much, and it was on SQL instance 01. So let's go back to this file and see that we have demo 1 with a date on it. So 2021 0913 1047. So it goes nicely in here. It doesn't put seconds on here. It just puts minutes for its purposes. You can manipulate that if you want to. If I use backup SQL database, which is the SQL Server one, we're going to splat that one. And it doesn't really give a whole lot of feedback other than fast, and it doesn't tell you an object back. It just does it. And now I have a demo full because this is the one I did, 1046 with 41 seconds. So now I'm in the second, so I could do another backup immediately after and have it be right with that. If I just run these again, the SQL Server one will actually give you a backup, because the SQL backup, if we were to look at the SQL backup contents, you'll see that there is a flaw in this logic of splatting in this particular case because it predefines the name. So this is several seconds later, and this says 1046:41, and guess what? 1046:41 is the same. So the SQL backup would actually put the backup in the same file, which we would want to rectify. The backup DBA database actually just creates a file, which is why we only had to specify the path to the folder, and it would create a file for us with names the way we want it to. So again, if I were to have this all set up in my environment and I just launched my PowerShell window and I just said, back up that database. It's a common one. I could do database name backup. I could do sets of backups in this one, and all it would take is a splat. So now I have a quick way to get the database backup done faster without having to type in backup database. Not that it's a bad idea to learn the T-SQL, but sometimes it's a little longer than doing this. And same with SQL Server module. It really depends. They're very different parameters, as you notice, backup action and type. So the backup action is database. If I wanted an incremental here or differential, I would have to add incremental here. Incremental equals true, because that's how SQL Server module does it, is an incremental file. And to get this to work, I'd have to re-execute this. So what I could do here is I could actually manipulate this backup SQL database and just copy and paste it again here after I changed this SQL backup thing here and said SQL backup dot, and it would be file, backup file, and I could rerun this so that it gets a new name. So SQL backup dot backup file equals, and it'll, if I run this, it will change the name backup file to equal this value now, so it would get me a new string for the time, and then if I backed up SQL database, followed up that, I would get this. So now if I ran that, it doesn't give me any feedback other than it does put a new backup here, and it has a new name. So I can still leverage the splatter and also do this, so I can get a new name. So let's talk about encrypting my backups, and I'm going to go do a little bit of cleanup because I believe I have a certificate here. We're going to drop the certificate in the master database on SQL 1 just to show you how you would clean it up or how you would handle it. Drop certificate, backup cert. and we're going to drop master key. So we've now cleaned up our database so we don't have a master key. And this, I wanted to show you how fast and easy it is to create a master key. In order to do a backup certificate, you need to have a master key in the master database, and then you create a certificate in the master database, and it will be encrypted by this master key. So it's really important. If I get DBA master key, it will tell me whether there is one, and there isn't one. We'll run this here in a minute. So here's my new DBA master key. This is a DBA tools function that says in master, here's my secure password, and which I'm going to type in. So I just execute this. It'll ask me the user, and I don't have to worry about the user. All I'm worried about is the password that I want to set for this master key. And you should probably document it as well before you lose it, because if you cannot open up that master key, then you have to drop it, and that causes other problems. But it did create it. It says my computer name, instance name, my database name is master, and here's my create date and modify date. It is encrypted by server, which means it's encrypted by the server service master key. So now I have a master key. If I ran this again, it would tell me that indeed I do have a master key. So now I can create my certificate. Let's see if I have a certificate. I do not have a certificate, so we're going to do a new DBA certificate, and it's going to be on SQL 1. The name is going to be called Backup Cert because that's what we used. The expiration date, I don't like to have it expire too soon. It automatically expires in a year. I set the expiration date to be 4 years out, or 10, or whatever you wish, and then it goes in the database master. So let's execute this, and it should give me some feedback. I get a backup cert back. So that's kind of handy. Now if I back up this guy, so here's my DBA encryption. That is this guy, DBA encryption. It says these are the options I need, and there's parameters called that. So let's back up DBA database here, and sure, it backs it up. We look at the file, and it doesn't look much different. It's 1 KB bigger, but it doesn't look much different. But we would find out by restoring file list only. Let's do that. So let's quickly go over here to Management Studio. We'll open up a window here, and we'll restore file list only from disk equals, and we'll go back to put this, take away this, and then we'll run it, and sure enough it's there, and it should indicate, it does not, well, it's TDE. We don't have TDE, so we do have a backup in there. We have a demo and a log. The file list only doesn't indicate whether or not it is encrypted or not. Let's just do this. Encryptor thumbprint here, and the encryptor type is certificate. So in the header, it will tell you that this is encrypted, as opposed to this other file that is not encrypted. If we did this one right here, we can take this name and bring it over here to this guy and look and see that it is not encrypted. If we go all the way over here, there is no encryptor thumbprint or encryptor type. So you can see that it did encrypt it the way we expected to when we did this. The bigger deal here is that it's not so easy with SQL encryption, because it actually requires an object called a SQL backup encryption option. So I created this little function that said, get me get MySQL, not to be confused with MySQL Server, but MySQL encryption option, and it basically creates a new backup encryption option with the values we pass in, which I'll show you how to do that. So I'm going to get my new option by doing, I can either do this and pipe this in. Okay, so let's watch that work. I can use my splat of my SQL encryption to get my encryption option. So if I did encryption option here, you'd see I do have one. Or I can just do encryption option equals the get MySQL encryption option with the values of passing in the variable there, and all of a sudden I get a new encryption option as well, and it's the same, it looks the same as the other one. So I can either do a new SQL backup encryption as part of my script, or I can just use my function to get it and have it written. And now I can actually say SQL backup splat, and notice I can even add parameters that aren't in my splat. This is a common set, this is an extra set, so I can add the encryption option onto my backup SQL database, and sure enough, let's do a different backup file to make sure we have this correct. I don't want to put one in the middle of one. So SQL backup here, I run this, and sure enough, I get a new one, and there's my new guy done by the SQL Server module. And if I do this guy here, you will see that we'll do a header only on this, and notice that it will be encrypted by encryptor thumbprint, and encryptor type is certificate, and there's my algorithm as AES 256. So I do get some benefit here. It's a separate object, but it works. But knowing that you already have an object with SQL backup information and you already have a SQL encryption option, you can get it either way here. So again, if you pre-set up your environment, you can get some things done a lot faster. Now here I show you how to manipulate a variable. So a hash table basically has an add and remove method on them. I can remove values or names from the hash table, and I can even add them back. Adding them back is a little easier, but because all I have to do is do dot and then type equals something, and it will just add the key. But if I did this and removed my database and type and showed you what was in there left, now I only have SQL instance and path, and now I can go get the databases, and I can back up the databases with the different names. So now I can do multiple ones with backup DBA databases. So if I said this command here and got my databases, you would see that in databases I have all my names. Now I can't do tempdb. So let's do this a little bit differently. If I back up it now, it will tell me, I'm sorry, but you can't back up tempdb. So it'll back up all of them, and it did not back up tempdb. Okay, great. That's awesome, because tempdb is in here. One of the functions actually would try to back up tempdb. I think it's the SQL Server module that tried to back it up, and it would complain. So then if you wanted to get databases without the system, you just use -exclude system here. This is when I tried to use it. Yeah, so the backup DBA database function actually knows that tempdb cannot be backed up, and it excludes it as part of its smartness. In the real world, if you were to get the database names here, you would definitely see that the database names do contain tempdb, and you might not think of that until you back them up. The backup DBA database and DBA tools omits it, but if I were to do this, say you were going to do a down and dirty backup database for a SQL Express, and SQL Express has all those databases, but the big thing about SQL Express is that it has no agent. So you just wanted to quickly get DBA database on the SQL instance, pull them in, but you just wanted to exclude system, because then I'm going to pass it into backup SQL database, and you'll see what that does without any parameters. You'll see what it does, And you want to be careful using this twice in a row because then you get two backups in a file. But if I pipe this in without this, let's just do this for now. Let's pipe this in without this, and you'll see what happens. It comes back and complains that backup and restore operations are not allowed on database tempdb. So it doesn't have the same smarts built in that says, please don't back up tempdb. It says, if you tell me a database to back me up. So I'm combining the use of both of the modules, SQL Server, and I'm combining the use of DBA tools together, getting me databases and piping them into backup SQL database. But if I put this parameter back in, you'll notice that the files that come up are master back and SMODB3, which it puts SMO in front. I'm not sure exactly why this one does that way, but it does. MSDB partition example SMODB2. So I'm not sure what it's doing for me, except that it is doing something weird. And if I were to back it up again, you would see it put the same names, that the same names would still exist, which I'm going to do right now, because all it does is it doesn't put any. Now they're double the size. Yeah, this is really weird. It is backing the thing up without what you call timestamps on them, which is odd enough. But the SQL Server module, that's what it does. It doesn't put a timestamp on them like this. It doesn't do that for you. Oh, I know why. It didn't actually back them up because there was an error. It didn't finish the backup. It actually validated that it could back them up. When I did it without the system, it actually came back. So it does have a check that if you were to try to back up a database that didn't exist or couldn't be backed up, it just wouldn't back up anything because these all have timestamps and these don't. Now they're still named SMO weird names. I'm not sure what I know why, because the name of the database is SMO in this instance. So let's go look. Here's my databases, SMODB2, SMODB3. Yeah, so it just backed up demo 1, partition, and 2 demos. There's SMO demo, partition example, and then it actually got the master. It did not back up MSDB in this particular case because we omitted it before, and it only got master before. So now we're going to delete all of these to make sure you know what to see. So if I back them up again using this, you'll see that I just get these guys without system, okay? Now I'm going to delete them again to show you what you're going to get with the error, because that's really important. When you start using these functions, you really do want to test and make sure you get what you expect, or that you know what happens when you run these, because that's one of the keys. Now I said backup, and this is why I got master. I got master because it started to back up the databases, but if you look at this variable, it does have master first, and that's why. So master tempdb, so it backed up master, hit tempdb, and blew an error and didn't continue. And you were like, wait a second, I want you to keep going. I don't want to just stop. So what we could do here is we could do a error action continue. So if I did that and executed this guy, it doesn't continue, okay? So we would get lulled into a false sense of security that this error action continue would allow it to continue. And in SQL Server module, they have chosen that that would not take place. So in this case, you would either have to filter them out, where name not like tempdb, and then back it up. And it's complaining because I didn't do where object. I did an alias. So now it would back them all up, and I would get them all. Okay, master model MSDB, because I filtered out this. Or, like I said, because we're using DBA tools, they do have an exclude system, and it allows me to filter those out. Now they also have a piece where you can do -database, and you can say I want master and model. And that's all. So let's delete these guys to make sure we all have a clear sense of what's actually going on. And I could say, just give me the database names of those and execute that, and it would back up master and model. Okay, so there's lots of ways to filter out in DBA tools, which is really handy with the Get DBA database. And you can have multiple database servers. It wouldn't work quite well here because it might not function the way you think it would, because it has to have access to, and my path is actually a C drive thing, not a share. If I was doing a share, it'd be different, but I'm doing a C drive, and so if I were to back up a SQL database with multiple instances from the Get DBA database, then I would get an error because it wouldn't have a C backup. Now, we're going to try something off demo just to show you what may be possible. Let's go into the SQL 02, which is also another instance I have, and we're going to make a C backup here. SQL backup here, and we're going to now go back to the database things here. SQL backup here, and we'll go back into, I'm sorry, I should have went forward there. There we go, SQL backup. So we're on SQL 2, SQL backup, and SQL 1. And we're just going to try something just for fun because I had a thought. If I want to back up master model, but I want to get it from both SQL 1 and SQL 02. Let's see if the SQL module can handle this guy. And it did. So if I look here, I have master model. That's on SQL 1. If I do SQL backup here, it didn't put them in there. It did not appreciate what I did. So it did illustrate that it backed them up, though. So that is really odd that it would do that. So it's another test. But again, test to make sure that when you execute these things, you get what you expect. It didn't error out. It executed it all. So it's kind of a weird thing where I can pass a database in, and maybe what it did is it just backed them up on the instance I was on. Let's delete these. 839 and 453. Yeah, that might have actually been two backups in there. Let's just find out. Just because we went down this path, I want to make sure we go down it all the way. So restore, file list only, or no, yeah, file list only. Because I'm really curious as to why. Let's do header only. Position 1, yeah, so it doesn't appear that it actually backed up twice. So it didn't error out, but it certainly didn't work like we expected it to. I was expecting this backup SQL database to put a file in here, in C SQL backup for SQL 01, and put one in here for the backup for SQL 02 as well, because it is on C and it does reach out to that server and issue the backup command. But interestingly enough, it does not. Now, there is an option for script for this, and maybe that will help us to understand what it actually did. If we hit this execute here, it does show me that it's backing up master, backing up model, and backing up master, and backing up model. So it does illustrate it sent these commands, but notice what it doesn't say. It doesn't say where it sent them to on that server. So that's interesting that it would do that. But it still goes without saying to test to make sure that you're getting what you expect so that you don't run an automation and find out you're off your rocker. All right, so that's enough about backup. But notice so many combinations of how you can get more done faster without having to mess with backup commands, and some of it is pre-defined. And anything you can predefine, this is how you get more done. Anything you can bundle together, things you do commonly. It doesn't have to be backups. It can be getting the DBA disk space. It can be all sorts of things where You go after DBA files, you go after availability groups and all these things. You can have these predefined in naming conventioned variables, put them in your profile. When you launch your profile, these are really fast to run because they're just variables. And all of a sudden you have a pre-set up environment that you can just execute commands with splatting. You have the ability to pipe together things like this guy to back up or to get other things. A lot of the DBA tools commands accept lots of ability to pipeline things in there for server instances, for database names, for all sorts of things. You actually have the ability to pipe together things and between modules as long as they accept the same thing. Backup SQL database does accept a database object as a pipeline object, so you're good there. All right, restore. Restore is a little bit more finicky because you have to have paths, and so restoring, you could do instances or you can use databases, but the reality is that you have a little bit less functionality other than instances and your favorite database names in variables rather than knowing the names of them. You know the names of the variables. But in this particular case, we're going to restore this database demo1 to SQL 02, and notice the path has to be a UNC unless you have on C backup here for SQL 02. If you have that demo1 file, then you're good to go. If you don't, then it will look to C on this guy and it will say, I can't find the file. So a UNC is the way you get around that, because we do have a, let's back up the model. I limited it again. Let's do this again. Delete. Set up our demo correctly. We're going to back up without master model and just exclude system databases. All right, let's not script this time. We'll back them all up so we have the files, and now we have demo1, so we're good there. So now we go down here and we say, just give me demo1 on SQL 02 and replace it. So we did it with replace. If I execute that, it comes back and no, it doesn't like it. Let's see what we did here. Backup SQL database. We didn't really do anything special. Let me do master demo1.back. So it's there. And that is really odd. Because basically the error message says no backups are passed through, and it wants the instance to be referred to, and the file's headers could not be read or some other issue. And the only way you're going to find that out is by doing the same command. So let's do this and say -script output script only. We'll do this, and it wouldn't even output the script because it couldn't find the files. So SQL demo1 apparently doesn't do that, so let's do this, and this is the only way I could find out the problem. I did enable exception, which is another way to do it, enable exception, and you should get the exception, but in this case, it just gave me the same error message, which really didn't help me. So we'll go back into Management Studio, and we'll say restore header only for this file. And then we should get the real error message. I'll look into why that is the case and see if there's something else we can do. But see, it sees it. I'm on SQL 01. Let's go to SQL 02 because that's where we're trying to restore to. And it gives me this error. There is a time, oh, not this again. Okay, well, I battled this in the demos when I tested the demos, and it looks like there's a time difference between the two servers. So let me see if I can fix that really quick. Sometimes that happens because SQL Server is pretty particular on what the time is. And basically this will just go out to my domain controller, 6:15 p.m. And we're just going to net time set. And let it set it based on the domain controller. And then we're going to go do the same thing with the 02. So enter PS session SQL 02. Then we're going to net time set. We're just going to get it synced up with the domain controller so that we can do this command. Okay. Let's just remote into that other machine. I apologize for this, but it's important for you to see it because sometimes this does happen, not just in demos, but sometimes I've found that this does happen, and there's no, I mean, these two machines were set up identically, so I'm not sure what the difference is, but that's for another day to figure out why it's doing this, but this is how you fix it. Once I did this in the demo testing, it worked fine, so I either have to implement a time server or something else to get that done. So let's do this now, and once that comes back, then I can run it in here, and we'll take out the output script, and we'll just do with replace, and sure enough, it will start restoring. So sometimes the exception isn't that helpful, but testing it out in Management Studio, making sure that your times are correct. I have not ran into this in production. This is in a test environment, so my test environment just isn't as resilient as production with times. But it does not like too much variation in the times between the servers. So be aware of that can stop SQL from doing an actual restore. This is the next example of a restore where I get the DBA backup history. So my SQL 01 here and my demo 1 database and my last full. So if I just execute that command only, you'll see what we get. We will get that it was a demo database. It was full, disk type, and backed up this time and this time. I can then pipe that into the restore-DBA database with replace, and I can trust the DB backup history. Okay, so if I execute this guy, it comes back and doesn't like my SQL instance. Let's see if I misspelled that right for some reason. Get DB backup SQL history, SQL instance. Yeah, that's really weird. Oh, I forgot to put the database server name. There we go. So if I restore that, it comes back and says cannot find C backup. See, notice how I C backup? This is what happens when I did a backup here and it's on C, but it stored the name in the backup history. So if I do this, you'll see what I get when I format list all, and it comes back and says my file is C demo. If I had a UNC, I was always back up the UNC, then it works. So this is one of those recommendations from a DBA perspective of when you back up servers, it's really not a good idea to land your backups on the SQL server you're running on. That's not really awesomely helpful. So if you had a UNC and you were always going to a backup server, this would work perfectly. I can circumvent this error by taking this demo 1, copying it, and pasting it to demo 2. And now if I run that, I had to move some stuff, but it did say C. If I ran that now, it will restore it because it loves me and it wants my demo not to fail. So demo 1 was restored, and the reality is it's really kind of a pain, but you'd copy that over to C backup because that's really what it wanted when you use the DBA tools. Now there's a lot of parameters to this restore-DBA database, so dig in. There's a ton that you can actually do. You can change the directories for the data, for the log, for the file stream. You can output script only. You can do all sorts of stuff with this restore-DBA database that can let you do tons of things that you might think you would want to do. But the other thing I love about this guy, and I'm not going to do demo with logs, but I can actually just do a directory of this SQL backup on SQL 1 share on demo backup and pipe that to restore database. Now the benefit of this is not for the full, but it does work. I can put the database name to be demo 1. I could even change it to demo 2 if I wanted to, and it wouldn't have to be worried about with replace. But if I said demo, it will actually restore. Oh yeah, it wants to put the thing there in the same place it was. So this is where I would put my options of the restore. Why Why do I not remember where that is? Anyway, I'll show you where to find it because this is important. dbatools.io. And if you go into docs and go into restore -DBA database, you'll see that there are a ton of options here. And this is what I wanted, destination. So destination data, destination log. So if I did that and change my destination data directory equals C something else, right? Or I could do this is another cool thing, is I can do a prefix. So it will let me do if you look here, you can actually put a prefix on the files. I should have scripted this out already. Destination file prefix. So I can actually say, whoops, there we go. Destination file prefix, and I can just put Ben. Now it doesn't matter that I'm restoring it with a different name. It will actually restore with a prefix on the files and then let me restore it. So now it restored it. Now my prefix is Ben Demo 1 and Ben Demo 1. So it doesn't conflict with the already existing database. But sure enough, if I look at databases now, I have a Demo 2 as well. So lots of fun things when you have the ability to do this in PowerShell. You can do a lot more things. Now, the last thing we're going to talk about that will end the session is really all about the use of notebooks. So I'm not sure how many of you have done notebooks, but I wanted to show you notebooks just to make sure you have an option. There are a lot of support out there for notebooks, SQL notebooks, PowerShell notebooks, DBA with a beard on Twitter, and Chrissy Lemaire, and Glenn Berry. There's lots of people who've done notebook stuff that you can actually create notebooks on the fly, or you can invoke a SQL notebook. There's a command in the module SQL Server that lets you do that. But if I click on my notebook here, watch what happens. I have not set up notebooks in Azure Data Studio, which may be your case if you've never done anything with notebooks. I've done this two ways, and I have only found good success if I say new Python installation and let it create its own installation of Python for notebooks. I did in the past have my own Python version on the machine before I did this, and it did not always turn out well. So I just wanted to show you this because I uninstalled my Python so that this would pop up because it didn't see a Python version. Always click new Python version installation and let it put it where it needs to be so that it can use Python for its notebook. But it's a Python notebook or it's a Jupyter notebook run under the covers with a Jupyter service, and you don't even have to worry about that. All you need is Python. So you click next here and then say install, and you'll see that it comes back and it installs Python package, blah, blah, blah. And it doesn't take very long, but once it's done, it will install and come up and say Jupyter service is running, Jupyter's running, and so you now have access to Python notebooks with different things. So now we're going to minimize this guy, and we're going to say, here's my PowerShell notebook. I've chosen PowerShell, and it's switched kernels so that I can run it. And I'm going to import a module. So let's run this cell. So import module DBA tools, and it gets DBA disk space. So let me run this, and sure enough, it will come back and run, and it shows me my C and F drives. If I do get DBA disk space here and then do a var in one cell, notice that the variable equals Ben. And if I just want to see what Ben is in a different cell, it actually is Ben. So now I actually get a variable that I can have stay with me. When I do it up here and I execute this and I execute the bottom below and execute the below and execute below, it actually works really well. So just know that the notebooks, you can put some text. You can add a cell that's text and say this is a text cell. So you can document what you're doing here and run it. The beauty of this guy here is that when you save the notebook, it can save the results in it as well. And you can hand that to somebody and this data will be there. So you could actually send a diagnostic PowerShell script notebook that has a cell here that says execute this, and you can actually say run all. So they could open this up in Azure Data Studio as long as they had a PowerShell notebook installed, and they could say run all, and it would put all of the results in here and store them so that you can just send this to somebody and the results will be open when I open it up. And all of a sudden you have this diagnostic way of remotely sending them something. They can see the commands that are run, so it's not like it's any secret, but they get the results too. And there's a Glenn Berry script, so all of you who are familiar with Glenn Berry and his diagnostic DMV scripts, there is a actual notebook of those scripts so that you could just send them and they can execute any cell they want, or you can execute them all and just, that's your diagnostics, you store the results and you walk away and have this for a snapshot in time. Name it today, you go and do it tomorrow, name it tomorrow, and now you have a snapshot of data. So there's really cool things in notebooks, but that's what I wanted to show you for all the beauty of PowerShell and the things you can do with PowerShell and notebooks and PowerShell with getting more done. This was much easier than writing a lot of T-SQL, and reusable and documented and all of this stuff. And when you pair that with your variables that you've done in your profile, you all of a sudden have a great value. Now, I will mention one more thing before we go to questions, and that is this does not have to be in your profile. It could be in another PS1 file. So you could have PS1 files in a folder that contain configuration data, and you don't have to always load them in your profile, but you dot source the file you put this in, and now they load in memory just like as if you put them in your profile. So you could mix and match and have, you know, configuration PS1 files so that you can do what you want to do in the PS1s and load them as you need them to be loaded. So anyway, great stuff. You can do much more. This is only a fraction of what you can do, but that's what my session is more about next week. Please let me know if you have any questions and we can get them answered. Appreciate your time, and we'll go back to slides to end, and thank you very much for attending. So in this session, you saw the tools that were needed for the session. You saw how to get the tools. We talked about the quick tips of importing your module first and not allowing auto load, and also the tips of putting variables in your profile or putting other things in variables so that you can get the most out of SQL without, or PowerShell, without having to remember them. And then we just went through the backup and restore commands, as well as showed you PowerShell notebooks. And hopefully this was a really helpful thing. We want to make sure that you got what you wanted out of it. Thank you very much to Microsoft for supporting this event and sponsoring. We really appreciate all the community events that they get involved in and things that we can do with everybody's help. And don't forget to post your selfie with your hashtag, and thank you very much.